February 20th, 1914. The only thing that is important, the one thing that counts, is the will to be identified more and more completely with thee, to unite our consciousness with thy absolute consciousness, to be more and more the peaceful, calm, disinterested, strong servitor of thy sovereign law, thy loving will. O Lord, give me the peace of perfect disinterestedness, the peace which makes thy presence effective, thy intervention efficacious, the peace ever triumphant over all bad will, all obscurity. Lord, very humbly I pray to thee that I may be equal to my task, that nothing in me, conscious or unconscious, may betray thee by neglecting to serve thy sacred mission. In a silent devotion, I bow to thee. February 21st, 1914. Every day, every moment should be an occasion for a new and completer consecration, and not one of those enthusiastic and florid consecrations, overactive, full of illusions about the work, but a deep and silent consecration which is not necessarily visible but penetrates and transfigures all action. Our mind, solitary and peaceful, should always repose in thee, and from that pure summit have the exact perception of realities, of the sole and eternal reality behind all unstable and fleeting appearances. O Lord, my heart is purified of all uneasiness and anguish, it is steady and calm and sees thee in all things, and whatever our outer actions may be, whatever the circumstances the future has in store for us, I know that thou alone livest, that thou alone art real in thy immutable permanence, and it is in thee that we live. May there be peace upon all the earth. February 22nd, 1914. When I was a child of about 13, for nearly a year every night as soon as I had gone to bed it seemed to me that I went out of my body and rose straight up above the house, then above the city, very high above. Then I used to see myself clad in a magnificent golden robe, much longer than myself, and as I rose higher, the robe would stretch, spreading out in a circle around me to form a kind of immense roof over the city. Then I would see men, women, children, old men, the sick, the unfortunate coming out from every side. They would gather under the outspread robe, begging for help, telling of their miseries, their suffering, their hardships. In reply, the robe, supple and alive, would extend towards each one of them individually, and as soon as they had touched it, they were comforted or healed, and went back into their bodies happier and stronger than they had come out of them. Nothing seemed more beautiful to me, nothing could make me happier, and all the activities of the day seemed dull and colorless and without any real life, beside this activity of the night which was the true life for me. Often while I was rising up in this way, I used to see at my left an old man, silent and still, who looked at me with kindly affection and encouraged me by his presence. This old man, dressed in a long dark purple robe, was the personification, as I came to know later, of him who is called the Man of Sorrows. Now that deep experience, that almost inexpressible reality, is translated in my mind by other ideas which I may describe in this way. Many a time in the day and night it seems to me that I am, or rather my consciousness is, concentrated entirely in my heart, which is no longer an organ, not even a feeling, but the divine love, impersonal, eternal, and being this love I feel myself living at the center of each thing upon the entire earth, and at the same time I seem to stretch out immense, infinite arms and envelop with a boundless tenderness all beings, clasped, gathered, nestled on my breast that is vaster than the universe. Words are poor and clumsy, O Divine Master, and mental transcriptions are always childish, but my aspiration to thee is constant, and truly speaking, it is very often thou and thou alone who livest in this body, this imperfect means of manifesting thee. May all beings be happy in the peace of thy illumination. February 23rd, 1914. Grant, O Lord, that we may be more and more conscious of thy law, that is, be one with it, so that we may foster its manifestation in all things. Lord, grant that I may become master of my vagabond thought, that living in thee I may see life only through thee, and the illusion of material reality may come to an end and be replaced by a perception more in conformity with thy eternal reality. Let me live constantly in thy divine love, so that it may live in me and through me. Grant that I may be an efficient and clear-sighted collaborator and that everything within me may foster the plenitude of thy manifestation. I know all my imperfections, my difficulties, my weaknesses, I feel all my ignorance, but I put my full trust in thee and bow down before thee in silent devotion. February 25 to 26, 1914. He who wants to serve thee worthily should not be attached to anything, not even to those activities which enable him to commune more consciously with thee. But if as a result of the totality of circumstances, material things still take a greater place in life than usual, one must know how not to become absorbed by them, how to keep in one's inmost heart the clear vision of thy presence and live constantly in that serene peace which nothing can disturb. Oh, to do everything seeing only thee everywhere and thus soar above the act that has been carried out, without letting any chain that holds us prisoners to the earth burden our flight. O Lord, grant that the offering I make to thee of my being may be integral and effective. With a respectful and loving devotion I bow down before thee, O ineffable essence, inconceivable reality, nameless one. February 27, 1914. O Lord, I sense the infinite happiness which is the portion of those whose life is entirely consecrated to thee. And this does not depend upon outer circumstances but on one's own state of being and its greater or lesser degree of illumination. A perfect consecration to thy law cannot but bring about modifications in the totality of circumstances, yet it is not these which make possible and express this perfect consecration. I mean that it is not under certain circumstances, always the same for all, that thy law is manifested. For every one this manifestation is different according to his temperament, that is, according to the mission which for the moment is assigned to him in physical life. But what is unchangeable and universal is the happy peace, the luminous and immutable serenity of all those who are solely consecrated to thee, who no longer have any darkness, ignorance, egoistic attachment or bad will in them. Oh, may all awake to this divine peace. March 1, 1914. It is in one's own self that all the obstacles lie, it is in one's own self that all the difficulties are found, it is in one's own self that there is all the darkness and ignorance. Were we to travel throughout the earth, were we to go and bury ourselves in some solitude, break with all our habits, lead the most ascetic life, yet if some bond of illusion held back our consciousness far from thy absolute consciousness, if some egoistic attachment cut us off from the integral communion with thy divine love, we would be no nearer thee despite all outer circumstances. Can any circumstances be considered more or less favorable? I doubt it. It is the idea we have about them which enables us to profit much or little by the lessons they give us. O Lord, I implore thee, grant that I may be perfectly conscious and master of all that constitutes this personality, so that I may be delivered from myself and thou alone mayst live and act through these multiple elements. To live in love, by love, for love, indissolubly united to thy highest manifestation. Always more light, more beauty, more truth. March 3, 1914. As the day of departure draws near, I enter into a kind of self-communion. I turn with a fond solemnity towards all those thousand little nothings around us which have silently, for so many years, played their role of faithful friends. I thank them gratefully for all the charm they were able to give to the outer side of our life. I wish that if they are destined to pass into other hands than ours for any length of time, these hands may be gentle to them and know all the respect that is due to what thy divine love, O Lord, has brought out from the dark inconscience of chaos. Then I turn towards the future and my gaze becomes more solemn still. What it holds in store for us I do not know nor care to know. Outer circumstances have no importance at all. My only wish is that this may be for us the beginning of a new inner period in which, more detached from material things, we could be more conscious of thy law and more one-pointedly consecrated to its manifestation, that it may be a period of greater light, greater love, of a more perfect dedication to thy cause. In a silent adoration I contemplate thee. March 4, 1914. It is likely to be the last time for a long while that I am writing at this table, in this calm room all charged with thy presence. For the next 3 days I shall probably not be able to write. In an indrawn state I contemplate this turning page, vanishing into the dream of the past, and look at the new page, all full potentially of the dream of the future. And yet how trifling this seems, how childish and unimportant, when seen in the light of thy eternity. The only thing that is important is to obey thy law with love and joy. O Lord, grant that everything in us may adore and serve thee. May peace be with all. Geneva, March 6, 1914. After having suffered acutely from their suffering, I turned towards thee, trying to heal it by infusing into it a little of that divine love which is the source of all peace and all happiness. We must not run away from suffering, we must not love and cultivate it either. We must learn how to go deep down into it sufficiently to turn it into a lever powerful enough for us to force open the doors of the eternal consciousness and enter the serenity of thy unchanging oneness. Surely this sentimental and physical attachment which causes an agonizing wrench when bodies are separated, is childish from a certain point of view, when we contemplate the impermanence of outer forms and the reality of thy essential oneness. But, on the other hand, is not this attachment, this personal affection, an unconscious effort in men to realize outwardly, as far as possible, that fundamental oneness towards which they always move without even being aware of it? And precisely because of that, is not the suffering that separation brings one of the most effective means of transcending this outer consciousness, of replacing this superficial attachment by the integral realization of thy eternal oneness? This is what I wished for them all, this is what I ardently willed for them. And that is why, assured of thy victory, certain of thy triumph, I confided their grief to thee, that by illuminating it thou mayst heal it. O Lord, grant that all this beauty of affection and tenderness may be transformed into glorious knowledge. Grant that the best may emerge from everything and thy happy peace reign over the earth. On board the Kagamaru, March 7, 1914. Dear, you were with us yesterday as the most marvelous of protections, thou didst permit thy law to triumph even in the most external manifestation. Violence was answered by calm, brutality by the strength of sweetness, and where an irreparable disaster would have occurred, thy power was glorified. O Lord, with what fervent gratitude did I greet thy presence! It was for me the sure sign that we would have the strength to act, to think, to live in thy name and for thee, not only in intention and will, but effectively in an integral realization. This morning my prayer rises to thee, always with the same aspiration, to live thy love, to radiate thy love, with such potency and effectiveness that all may feel fortified, regenerated and illumined by our contact. To have power to heal life, to relieve suffering, to generate peace and calm confidence, to efface anguish and replace it by the sense of the one true happiness, the happiness that is founded in thee and never fades. O Lord, O marvelous friend, O all-powerful Master, penetrate all our being, transfigure it till thou alone livest in us and through us. March 8, 1914. I am in front of this calm sunrise which turned all within me into silence and peace, at the moment when I grew conscious of thee and thou alone wast living in me, O Lord. It seemed to me that I adopted all the inhabitants of this ship, and enveloped them in an equal love, and that so in each one of them something of thy consciousness would awake. Not often had I felt so strongly thy divine power and thy invincible light, and once again total was my confidence and unmixed my joyful surrender. O thou who relievest all suffering and dispersest all ignorance, O thou the supreme healer, be constantly present on this boat in the heart of those whom it shelters, that once again thy glory may be manifested. March 9, 1914. Those who live for thee and in thee may change their physical surroundings, their habits, climate, milieu, but everywhere they find the same atmosphere. They carry that atmosphere in themselves, in their thought constantly fixed on thee. Everywhere they feel at home, for everywhere they are in thy house. No longer do they marvel at the novelty, unexpectedness, picturesqueness of things and countries. For them, it is thy presence that is manifest in all, and thy unchangeable splendor, which never leaves them, is apparent in the least grain of sand. The whole earth chants thy praises, in spite of the obscurity, misery, ignorance, through it all, it is still the glory of thy love which we perceive and with which we can commune ceaselessly everywhere. O Lord, my sweet Master, all this I constantly experience on this boat which seems to me a marvelous abode of peace, a temple sailing in thy honor over the waves of the subconscious passivity which we have to conquer and awaken to the consciousness of thy divine presence. Blessed was the day when I came to know thee, O ineffable eternity. Blessed among all days be that day when the earth at last awakened shall know thee and shall live only for thee. March 10, 1914. In the silence of the night thy peace reigned over all things, in the silence of my heart thy peace reigns always, and when these two silences were united, thy peace was so powerful that no disturbance of any kind could resist it. Then I thought of all those who were watching over the boat to safeguard and protect our course, and in gratefulness I wanted to make thy peace spring up and live in their hearts. Then I thought of all those who, confident and free from care, slept the sleep of inconscience, and with solicitude for their miseries, pity for their latent suffering which would arise in them when they awoke, I wanted that a little of thy peace might live in their hearts, and awaken in them the life of the Spirit, the light that dispels ignorance. Then I thought of all the inhabitants of this vast sea, both visible and invisible, and I willed that thy peace might spread over them. Then I thought of those we had left far behind and whose affection goes with us, and with a great tenderness I wanted thy conscious and lasting peace for them, the plenitude of thy peace as far as they could receive it. Then I thought of all those towards whom we are going, who are troubled by childish preoccupations and fight in ignorance and egoism for petty rivalries of interest, and ardently, in a great aspiration, I asked for them the full light of thy peace. Then I thought of all those we know, all those we do not know, all the life in the making, all that has changed its form, all that is not yet in form, and for all these, even as for all that I cannot think about, for all that is present to my memory and for all that I forget, in a deep contemplation and mute adoration I implored thy peace. March 12, 1914. O Lord, my one aspiration is to know thee and serve thee better every day. What do outer circumstances matter? They seem to me each day more vain and illusory. And I take less and less interest in what is going to happen to us in the outer life, but more and more am I intensely interested in the one thing which seems important to me, to know thee better in order to serve thee better. All outer events must converge upon this goal and this goal alone, and for that all depends upon the attitude we have towards them. To seek thee constantly in all things, to want to manifest thee ever better in every circumstance, in this attitude lies supreme peace, perfect serenity, true contentment. In it life blossoms, widens, expands so magnificently in such majestic waves that no storm can any longer disturb it. O Lord, thou art our safeguard, our only happiness, thou art our resplendent light, our pure love, our hope and our strength. Thou art our life, the reality of our being. In a reverent and joyful adoration I bow to thee. March 13, 1914. How many different levels there are in consciousness! This word should be reserved for what is illumined in a being by thy presence, is identified with thee and par. Takes of thy absolute consciousness, for that which has knowledge, that which is perfectly awakened, as the Buddha says. Outside this state there are infinite grades of consciousness, going right down to complete darkness, the veritable inconscience which may be a domain yet untouched by the light of thy divine love, but this seems improbable in physical substance, or which is, for some kind of reason of ignorance, outside our individual range of perception. This is, however, only a way of speaking, and a very incomplete one, for when the being becomes aware of thy presence and is identified with thy consciousness, it is conscious in all things and everywhere. But the fleeting duration of this supreme consciousness can be explained only by the complexity of the elements of the being, by their unequal illumination and by the fact that they enter into activity successively. It is, moreover, because of this successive activity that they can gradually become aware of themselves as a result of their experiences, both objective and subjective, which are really one and the same, that is, discover thee in their unfathomable essence. The subconscient is the intermediate zone between precise perception and ignorance, total darkness. It is probable that most beings, even human beings, live constantly in this subconscient, few emerge from it. This is the conquest that is to be made, for to be conscious in the true sense of the word is to be thyself integrally, and is not this the very definition of the work to be accomplished, the mission to be fulfilled upon earth? Deliver us, O Lord, from darkness, grant that we may become perfectly awake. Sweet Master of love, grant that all my consciousness may be concentrated in thee so that I may live only by love and light and that love and light may radiate through me and awaken in all on our journey. May this physical journey be like a symbol of our action and may we leave everywhere a trace of thee like a trail of light and love. O Divine Master, Eternal Teacher, thou livest in all things, in all beings, and thy love bursts upon the sight of even the most ignorant. Grant that all may become aware of it in the depths of their being and that hatred may disappear forever from their hearts. My ardent gratitude rises to thee like a tireless chant. March 14, 1914. In the immutable solitude of the desert there is something of thy majestic presence, and I understand why one of the best means of finding thee has always been to withdraw into these immense stretches of sand. But for one who knows thee, thou art everywhere, in all things, and none of them seems more suitable than another for manifesting thee, for all things that exist and many others that yet do not are necessary to express thee. Each thing, by virtue of thy divine intervention of love, is an effort of life towards thee, and as soon as our eyes are unsealed, we perceive this effort constantly. O Lord, my heart is athirst for thee and my thought seeks for thee constantly. In a mute adoration I bow to thee. March 15, 1914. My thought is filled with thee, my heart is full, all my being is filled with thy presence, and peace grows ever deeper, giving rise to that happiness, so special, so unmixed, of a calm serenity, which seems vast as the universe, deep as the unfathomable depths which lead to thee. Oh, these silent and pure nights when my heart overflows and unites with thy divine love to penetrate all things, embrace all life, illumine and regenerate all thought, purify all feeling, awaken in every being the consciousness of thy marvelous presence and of the ineffable peace that flows from it. Grant, O Lord, that this consciousness and peace may constantly grow within us, so that we may be more and more the faithful intermediaries of thy divine and absolute law. March 17, 1914. When physical conditions are a little difficult and some discomfort follows, if one knows how to surrender completely before thy will, caring little for life or death, health or illness, the integral being enters immediately into harmony with thy law of love and life, and all physical indisposition ceases, giving place to a calm well-being, deep and peaceful. I have noticed that when one enters into an activity that necessitates great physical endurance, what tires one most is anticipating beforehand all the difficulties to which one will be exposed. It is much wiser to see at every moment only the difficulty of the present instant. In this way the effort becomes much easier, for it is always proportionate to the amount of strength, the resistance at one's disposal. The body is a marvelous tool, it is our mind that does not know how to use it and, instead of fostering its suppleness, its plasticity, it brings a certain fixity into it which comes from preconceived ideas and unfavorable suggestions. But the supreme science, O Lord, is to unite with thee, to trust in thee, to live in thee, to be thyself, and then nothing is any longer impossible to a man who manifests thy omnipotence. Lord, my aspiration rises to thee like a silent canticle, a mute adoration, and thy divine love illumines my heart. O Divine Master, I bow to thee. March 18, 1914. Teacher, you art perfect knowledge, absolute consciousness. He who unites with thee is omniscient, while the union lasts. But even before attaining this stage, he who has given himself to thee in all the sincerity of his being, with all his conscious will, he who has resolved to make every effort to help in the manifestation and triumph of thy divine law of love in himself and the whole field of his influence, sees all things in his life change, and all circumstances begin to express thy law and assist his consecration. For him it is the best, the very best that always happens, and if in his intelligence there is still some obscurity, some ignorant desire which at times prevents him from becoming aware of it immediately, he recognizes sooner or later that a beneficent power seemed to protect him even from himself and secure for him conditions most favorable to his blossoming and transfiguration, his integral conversion and utilization. As soon as one becomes conscious and convinced of this, one can no longer worry about future circumstances or the turn events take. It is with perfect serenity that one does at every moment what one thinks best, convinced that the best too is sure to come from it, even if it is not the result which we, with our limited reasoning, expected from it. That is why, Lord, our heart is light, our thought in repose. That is why we turn to Thee in all confidence and say peacefully, May Thy will be done, in it true harmony is realized. March 19, 1914. O Lord, eternal Teacher, Thou whom we can neither name nor understand, but whom we want to realize more and more at every moment, enlighten our intelligence. Illumine our hearts, transfigure our consciousness, may everyone awaken to the true life, flee from egoism and its train of sorrow and anguish, and take refuge in Thy divine and pure love, source of all peace and all happiness. My heart so full of Thee seems to expand into infinity, and my intelligence, all illumined with Thy presence, shines like the purest diamond. Thou art the wonderful magician, He who transfigures all things, from ugliness brings forth beauty, from darkness light, from the mud clear water, from ignorance knowledge and from egoism goodness. In Thee, by Thee, for Thee we live, and Thy law is the supreme master of our life. May Thy will be done in every place, may Thy peace reign upon all the earth. March 20, 1914. Teacher, You art consciousness and light, Thou art peace in the depth of all things, the divine love that transfigures, the knowledge that triumphs over darkness. To feel Thee and aspire to Thee, one should have emerged from the immense sea of the subconscious, one should have begun to crystallize, to grow distinct so as to know oneself and then give oneself as that alone which is its own master can do. And what effort and struggle it takes to attain this crystallization, to emerge from the amorphous state of the environment, and how much more effort and struggle yet to give oneself, to surrender once the individuality has been formed. Few beings consent willingly to make this effort, so life with its brutal unforeseen events obliges men to make it unintentionally, for they cannot do otherwise. And little by little Thy work is accomplished despite all obstacles. March 21, 1914. Every morning my aspiration rises ardently to Thee, and in the silence of my satisfied heart I ask that Thy law of love may be expressed, that Thy will may manifest. And in anticipation I adhere with joy and serenity to those circumstances which will express this law and this will. Oh, why be restless and want that for oneself things should turn out in one way and not another? Why decide that a particular set of circumstances will be the expression of the best possibilities and then launch into a bitter struggle so that these possibilities may be realized? Why not use all one's energy solely to will in the calm of inner confidence that Thy law may triumph everywhere and always over all difficulties, all darkness, all egoism? How the horizon widens as soon as one learns to take this attitude, how all anxiety vanishes, giving place to a constant illumination, to the omnipotence of disinterestedness. To will what Thou willest, O Lord, is to live constantly in communion with Thee, to be delivered from all contingencies, to escape all narrowness, to fill one's lungs with pure and wholesome air, to get rid of all useless weariness, be relieved of all cumbrous loads, so as to run briskly towards the only goal worth attaining, the triumph of Thy divine law. O Lord, with what joy and trust one greet Thee this morning. March 22, 1914. O Lord, divine Master of love, enlighten their consciousness and their hearts. They have made an effort to reach out towards Thee, but because of their ignorance, their prayers probably did not rise to Thee, and their false conceptions have barred the way to their aspiration. Yet in thy mercy thou dost turn all goodwill to account, and a flash of sincerity is enough for thy divine light to use it to illumine the intelligence, for thy sublime love to penetrate into all hearts and fill them with that pure and lofty benevolence which is one of the best expressions of thy law. What I willed for them, with thy will, in moments when I could be in true communion with thee. Grant that they may have received it on the day when, striving to forget all outer contingencies, they turned to their noblest thought, their best feelings. May the supreme serenity of thy sublime presence awaken them. March 23, 1914. As I see it, the ideal state is that in which, constantly conscious with thy consciousness, one knows at every moment, spontaneously, without any reflection being nec. Essary, exactly what should be done to best express thy law. That state I know, for I have experienced it at certain moments, but very often the knowledge of the how is veiled by a mist of ignorance, and one must call in reflection, which is not always a good counselor, let alone all that one does at every instant without having any time for reflection, on the spur of the moment. How far does it conform with or oppose thy law? That depends upon the state of the subconscient, on what is active in it at that time. Once the deed is done, if it has any importance, if one can look at it, analyze it, understand it, it serves as a lesson, enables one to become aware of one's motive of action and hence of something in the subconscient which still governs the being and has to be mastered. Every action on earth is bound to have a good and a bad side. Even the actions which best express the most divine law of love carry in them something of the disorder and darkness inherent in the world as it is today. Some people, those who are called pessimists, perceive almost exclusively the dark side of everything. The optimists, on the other hand, see only the side of beauty and harmony. And if it is foolish and ignorant to be an unwitting optimist, is it not making a happy conquest to become a willing optimist? In the eyes of pessimists, whatever one does will always be bad, ignorant or egoistic. How could one satisfy them? It is an impossible task. There is only one recourse, to unite as perfectly as possible with the highest and purest light that one can conceive, to identify one's consciousness as completely as possible with the absolute consciousness, to strive to receive all inspirations from that consciousness alone so as to foster as best one can its manifestation upon earth, and, trusting in its power, to regard all events with serenity. Since everything is necessarily mixed in the present manifestation, the wisest thing is to do one's best, striving towards an ever higher light and to resign oneself to the fact that absolute perfection is for the moment unrealizable. And yet how ardently must we always aspire for that inaccessible perfection. March 24, 1914. Teachy result of all my reflections of yesterday is the finding that the only disturbance I experience comes from my fear of not having been or of not being perfectly identified with thy law. And this disturbance comes precisely from the fact that the identification is not complete, for if it were, I could not ask myself whether it is so and, on the other hand, as I know from experience, all disturbance would become impossible for me. But in face of an error or blunder, the true thought to have is not to say to oneself, I should have done better, I should have done this instead of that, but rather I was not sufficiently identified with the eternal consciousness, I must strive to realize better this definitive and integral union. Yesterday afternoon, during those long hours of silent contemplation, I understood at last what is meant by true identification with the object of one's thought. I touched this realization, as it were, not by achieving a mental state, but simply through steadiness and control of thought. I understood that I would need long, very long hours of contemplation to be able to perfect this realization. This is one of the things I expect from the journey to India, if indeed thou dost consider it useful for thy service, Lord. My progress is slow, very slow, but I hope that in compensation it may be lasting and free from all fluctuation. Grant that I may accomplish my mission, that I may help in thy integral manifestation. March 25, 1914. Silent and unseen as always, but all-powerful, thy action has made itself felt and, in these souls that seem to be so closed, a perception of thy divine light is awake. I knew well that none could invoke thy presence in vain, and if in the sincerity of our hearts we commune with thee through no matter what organism, body or human collectivity, this organism in spite of its ignorance finds its unconsciousness wholly transformed. But when in one or several elements there is the conscious transformation, when the flame that smoulders under the ashes leaps out suddenly illumining all the being, then with joy we salute thy sovereign action, testify once more to thy invincible puissance, and can hope that a new possibility of true happiness has been added to the others in mankind. O Lord, an ardent thanksgiving mounts from me towards thee, expressing the gratitude of this sorrowing humanity which thou illuminest, transformest and glorifiest, and givest to it the peace of knowledge. March 28, 1914. From the time we started and every day more and more, in all things we can see thy divine intervention, everywhere thy law is expressed, and I need all my inner conviction to feel that this is perfectly natural, so that I do not pass from wonder to wonder. At no moment do I feel that I am living outside thee, and never have the horizons appeared vaster to me and the depths at once more luminous and unfathomable. Grant, O divine teacher, that we may know and accomplish our mission upon earth better and better, more and more, that we may make full use of all the energies that are in us, and thy sovereign presence become manifest ever more perfectly in the silent depths of our soul, in all our thoughts, all our feelings, all our actions. I find it almost strange to speak to thee, so much is it. Thou who livest in me, thinkest and lovest. Pondicherry, March 29, 1914. O teacher, you whom we must know, understand, realize, absolute consciousness, eternal law, thou who guidest and illuminest us, who movest and inspirest us, grant that these weak souls may be strengthened, and those who fear be reassured. To thee I entrust them, even as I entrust to thee our entire destiny. March 30, 1914. I in the presence of those who are integrally thy servitors, those who have attained the perfect consciousness of thy presence, I become aware that I am still far, very far from what I yearn to realize, and I know that the highest I can conceive, the noblest and purest, is still dark and ignorant beside what I should conceive. But this perception, far from being depressing, stimulates and strengthens the aspiration, the energy, the will to triumph over all obstacles so as to be at last identified with thy law and thy work. Gradually the horizon becomes distinct, the path grows clear, and we move towards a greater and greater certitude. It matters little that there are thousands of beings plunged in the densest ignorance. He whom we saw yesterday is on earth. His presence is enough to prove that a day will come when darkness shall be transformed into light, and thy reign shall be indeed established upon earth. O Lord, divine builder of this marvel, my heart overflows with joy and gratitude when I think of it, and my hope has no bounds. My adoration is beyond all words, my reverence is silent. April 1, 1914. I feel we have entered the very heart of thy sanctuary and grown aware of thy very will. A great joy, a deep peace reign in me, and yet all my inner constructions have vanished like a vain dream, and I find myself now, before thy immensity, without a frame or system, like a being not yet individualized. All the past in its external form seems ridiculously arbitrary to me, and yet I know it was useful in its own time. But now all is changed, a new stage has begun. April 2, 1914. Every day, when I want to write, I am interrupted, as though the new period opening now before us were a period of expansion rather than of concentration. It is in the activity of each moment that we must serve thee and identify ourselves with thee rather than in deep and silent contemplation or in meditation, written or unwritten. But my heart does not tire of singing a hymn to thee, and my thought is constantly filled with thee. April 3, 1914. It seems to me that I am being born to a new life, and all the methods, the habits of the past can no longer be of any use. It seems to me that what I thought were results is nothing more than a preparation. I feel as though I have done nothing yet, as though I have not lived the spiritual life, only entered the path that leads to it, it seems to me that I know nothing, that I am incapable of formulating anything, that all experience is yet to begin. It is as though I was stripped of my entire past, of its errors as well as its conquests, as though all that has vanished and made room for a newborn child whose whole existence is yet to be lived, who has no karma, no experience to learn from, but no error either which has to be set right. My head is empty of all knowledge and all certitude, but also of all vain thought. I feel that if I learn how to surrender without any resistance to this state, if I do not try to know or understand, if I consent to be completely like an ignorant and candid child, some new possibility will open before me. I know that I must now definitively give myself up and be like an absolutely blank page on which thy thought, thy will, O Lord, can be inscribed freely without danger of any deformation. An immense gratitude rises from my heart. It seems to me that I have at last reached the threshold I sought so much. Grant, O Lord, that I may be sufficiently pure, impersonal, animated with thy divine love to be able to cross it definitively. Oh, to belong to thee without any darkness, without any restriction. April 4, 1914. O Lord, my adoration rises ardently to thee, all my being is an aspiration, a flame consecrated to thee. Lord, Lord, my sweet Master, it is thou who livest and willest in me. This body is thy instrument, this will is thy servant, this intelligence is thy tool, and the whole being is only thyself. April 7, 1914. What kind of courage is mine that I always try to avoid the fight? What kind of energy is mine, that I am instinctively frightened of the new effort to be made and try, without being aware of it, to go to sleep passively, relying upon the results of previous efforts? In order to act, I have to be compelled, and my mute contemplation is partly made of laziness. All this is becoming more and more clearly apparent to me. All that I have done till now seems to me to be nothing. The poverty and limitations of the instrument I put at thy service, Lord, are evident to me, and I laugh a little sorrowfully at the idea that at times I could have a good opinion of my being, its efforts and their results. This threshold of the true life that I always think I have reached is like a hope bestowed upon me but never a tangible realization. It is the toy promised to a child, the reward held out for a moment before the weak. When shall I become a truly strong being, made entirely of courage, energy, valor and calm perseverance? When shall I have forgotten my own person completely enough to be nothing but an instrument molded solely by the forces it has to manifest? When will my consciousness of unity be no longer tinged with any inertia? When will my feeling of divine love be no longer mixed with any weakness? O Lord, all thought seems dead within me, now that I have asked these questions. I search for my conscious mind and I do not find it. I search for my individuality and I cannot discover it anywhere. I search for my personal will and it is not there. I search for thee, and thou art silent. Silence, silence. Now I seem to hear thy voice. Never hast thou known how to die integrally. Always something in thee has wanted to know, to witness, to understand. Surrender completely, learn how to disappear, break the last barrier that separates thee from me, accomplish unreservedly thy act of surrender. Alas, O Lord, for a long time have I wanted it, but I could not. Now wilt thou give me the power to do so? O Lord, my sweet eternal Master, break this resistance, which fills me with anguish. Deliver me from myself. April 8, 1914. Lord, my thought is calm and my heart ingathered. I turn towards thee with a profound devotion and a boundless trust. I know that thy love is all-powerful and that thy justice will reign over the earth. I know that the hour is near when the last veil will be rent and all iniquity disappear to give place to an era of peace and harmonious effort. O Lord, with thought wrapped within and the heart at peace, I approach thee and all my being is filled with thy divine presence. Grant that I may see thee alone in all things and that all may be resplendent with thy divine light. Oh, may all hatred be appeased, all rancor effaced, all fears dispelled, all suspicions destroyed, all malevolence overcome, and in this city, in this country, upon this earth, may all hearts feel vibrating within them that sublime love, source of all transfiguration. O Lord, how ardently do I call and implore thy love! Grant that my aspiration may be intense enough to awaken the same aspiration everywhere. Oh, may goodness, justice and peace reign as supreme masters, may ignorant egoism be overcome, darkness be suddenly illuminated by thy pure light, may the blind see, the deaf hear, may thy law be proclaimed in every place and, in a constantly progressive union, in an ever more perfect harmony, may all, like one single being, stretch out their arms towards thee to identify themselves with thee and manifest thee upon earth. O Lord, with thought wrapped within, the heart radiant with sunshine, I give myself to thee without reservation. And the self disappears in thee. April 10, 1914. Suddenly the veil was rent, the horizon was disclosed. And before the clear vision my whole being threw itself at thy feet in a great outburst of gratitude. Yet in spite of this deep and integral joy all was calm, all was peaceful with the peace of eternity. I seem to have no more limits, there is no longer the perception of the body, no sensations, no feelings, no thoughts, a clear, pure, tranquil immensity penetrated with love and light, filled with an unspeakable beatitude is all that is there and that alone seems now to be myself, and this myself is so little the former I, selfish and limited, that I cannot tell if it is I or thou, O Lord, sublime master of our destinies. It is as though all were energy, courage, force, will, infinite sweetness, incomparable compassion. Even more forcibly than during these last days the past is dead and as though buried under the rays of a new life. The last glance that I have just thrown backward as I read a few pages of this book definitely convinced me of this death. Enlightened of a great weight I present myself before thee, O my divine Master, with all the simplicity, all the nudity of a child and still the one only thing I perceive is that calm and pure immensity. Lord, thou hast answered my prayer, thou hast granted me what I have asked from thee, though I has disappeared, there is only a docile instrument put at thy service, a center of concentration and manifestation of thy infinite and eternal rays. Thou hast taken my life and made it thine, thou hast taken my will and hast united it to thine, thou hast taken my love and identified it with thine, thou hast taken my thought and replaced it by thy absolute consciousness. The body, marveling, bows its forehead in the dust in mute and submissive adoration. And nothing else exists but thou alone in the splen door of thy immutable peace. Caracal, April 13, 1914. Everything works together to prevent me from remaining a creature of habits, and in this new state, in the midst of these circumstances, so complex and unstable, I have never before so completely lived thy immutable peace, or rather thou has never before disappeared so completely that thy divine peace alone is alive there. All is beautiful, harmonious and calm, all is full of thee. Thou shinest in the dazzling sun, thou art felt in the gentle passing breeze, thou dost manifest thyself in all hearts and live in all beings. There is not an animal, a plant that does not speak to me of thee, and thy name is written upon everything I see. O my sweet Lord, hast thou at last granted that I may belong entirely to thee and that my consciousness may be definitively united with thine? What have I done to be worthy of so glorious a happiness? Nothing except to desire it, to want it with constancy, that is very little. But, O Lord, since now it is thy will and not mine that lives in me, thou wilt be able to make this happiness profitable to all, and its very purpose will be to enable the greatest possible number of beings to perceive thee. Oh, may all know thee, love thee, serve thee, may all receive the supreme consecration. O love, divine love, spread abroad in the world, regenerate life, enlighten the intelligence, break the barriers of egoism, scatter the obstacles of ignorance, shine resplendent as sovereign master of the earth. Pondicherry, April 17, 1914. O Lord, O Almighty Master, sole reality, grant that no error, no obscurity, no fatal ignorance may creep into my heart and my thought. In action, the personality is the inevitable and indispensable intermediary of thy will and thy forces. The stronger, the more complex, powerful, individualized and conscious is the personality, the more powerfully and usefully can the instrument serve. But, by reason of the very character of personality, it easily tends to be drawn into the fatal illusion of its separate existence and become little by little a screen between thee and that on which thou willest to act. Not at the beginning, in the manifestation, but in the transmission of the return, that is to say, instead of being, as a faithful servant, an intermediary who brings back to thee exactly what is thy due, the forces sent forth in reply to thy action, there is a tendency in the personality to want to keep for itself a part of the forces, with this idea, it is I who have done this or that, I who am thanked. Pernicious illusion, obscure falsehood, now are you discovered and unmasked. That is the maleficent canker corroding the fruit of the action, falsifying all its results. O Lord, O my sweet Master, sole reality, dispel this feeling of the I. I have now understood that so long as there will be a manifested universe, though I will remain necessary for thy manifestation, to dissolve, or even to diminish or weaken the I, is to deprive thee of the means of manifestation, in whole or part. But what must be radically and definitively suppressed is the illusory thought, the illusory feeling, the illusory sensation of the separate I. At no moment, in no circumstances must we forget that our I has no reality outside thee. O my sweet Master, my divine Lord, tear out from my heart this illusion so that thy servant may become pure and faithful and faithfully and integrally bring back to thee all that is thy due. In silence let me contemplate and understand this supreme ignorance and dispel it forever. Chase the shadow from my heart, and let thy light reign in it, its uncontested sovereign. April 18, 1914. Yesterday morning the last veil was almost rent, the last stronghold of the blind and ignorant personality seemed to be on the point of yielding, for the first time. I thought I had understood what true impersonal service was, and the obstacle separating me from the integral realization seemed very fragile to me, and on the point of disappearing definitively. But the necessity of my outer duties tore me away from this beneficent and happy contemplation, and when I was obliged to return to the outer consciousness the veil closed again and now seems to me darker than ever. Why this fall into the inconscience of night after so great a light? O Lord, Lord, wilt thou not then let me escape at last from ignorance and become one with thee? Now that I have known and seen so well what the work upon the earth must be, could I not realize it? Am I then riveted to ignorance and illusion? Why this night after so great and pure a light? All my being is tense in a call of anguish. O Lord, take pity on me. April 19, 1914. There is a great difference between being in the midst of active work, of external action, while keeping one's thought constantly fixed on thee, and entering into that perfect union with thee which leads to what I have called absolute consciousness, true omniscience, knowledge. When one acts, though with the thought fixed on thee, one is like a blind man walking on the road with a sense of direction, but knowing nothing about the path he is following and how, precisely, one must walk so as to neglect nothing. In the other case, on the contrary, there is the clear vision in full light, the utilization of the least occasion, the plenitude of action, the maximum result. And if the first attitude is indispensable before acquiring the other, yet at no moment must one cease working, making an effort to attain perfect communion. But my heart is in peace, my thought free from impatience, and I entrust myself to thy will with the smiling confidence of a child. May thy peace reign over all. April 20, 1914. After having hoped so much, after having believed that my outer being was at last to become an instrument adapted to thy purpose, after feeling hopeful that I would at last be delivered from this obscure and cumbersome self, I feel I am as far from the goal as before, as ignorant, as egoistic as I was before this great expectation. And the path stretches out once again, interminable across the fields of inconscience. The sublime door has closed again, and I find myself still on the threshold of the sanctuary without being able to enter within. But I have learnt to look at everything with a smile and a tranquil heart. I ask only this of thee, O my divine Master, not to let me make any mistakes, even if the instrument is still condemned for a time to unconsciousness. Grant that it may let itself be guided faithfully and docilely by thy divine law. I bow to thee, O Lord, with a deep and pure devotion. O, be the sovereign master of all hearts. April 23, 1914. All rules have vanished, the regularity of the discipline is gone, all effort has ceased, not by my own will nor, I believe, through negligence, but because circumstances are working together to bring this about. It seems that this inner will, always alert, like a steersman holding the rudder, has evaporated or fallen asleep, and my being is only something peacefully surrendered which lets itself be carried along by the stream. Till now, it seems to me, the course has always been in a straight line, and I would keep the hope that it is thou, O Lord, who guidest the stream, but surely if I have erred at times through too great a rigidity, a lack of suppleness and spontaneity, it could very well be that now I err through the opposite excess. I have come to accept peacefully the state I am in and to tell myself that thou wilt bestow upon me the true consciousness, the absolute consciousness when thou thinkest it best. I look at all this changing world as a game unfolding itself, and I take part in this game with the same energy and conviction with which I would if I believed it real and important. All this is very new. But what is certain is that never before were my mind and heart in so complete a repose. What will come out of that, I do not know. But I trust in thee, O Lord, thou knowest the best way of using and developing thy instrument. April 28, 1914. Teacher, you art the master of the world, thy law unfolds before us with precision, and as I thought, or rather as thou didst make me understand it before we left Paris. It is the best, what could best serve thy work in the world, that has happened. In beatitude I communed with thy puissance dominating over darkness and error, shining like a marvelous and eternal dawn above the mud of hypocritical force and its apparent success. Everything has been brought to light, we have taken one more step towards the full light of sincerity, and this full light will be the first stage of thy reign upon earth. O thou inconceivable splendor, thou conqueror of all ignorance, victor over all egoism, thou who dost illumine all hearts and enlighten all minds, thou who art knowledge and love and being, let me live constantly in the consciousness of thy unity, let me always conform to thy will. With reverent and silent devotion I bow to thee as the sovereign Lord of the world. May 2, 1914. Beyond all human conceptions, even the most marvelous, beyond all human feelings, even the most sublime, beyond the most magnificent aspirations and the purest flights, beyond love, knowledge and the oneness of being, I would enter into constant communion with thee, O Lord. Free from all shackles I shall be thyself, it will be thou who wilt see the world through this body, it will be thou who wilt act in the world through this instrument. In me is the calm serenity of perfect certitude. May 3, 1914. O divine love, supreme knowledge, perfect oneness, at every moment of the day I call to thee so as to be nothing but thou alone. May this instrument serve thee, conscious of being an instrument, and may all my consciousness, merged in thine, contemplate all things with thy divine vision. O Lord, Lord, grant that thy sovereign power may manifest, grant that thy work may be accomplished and thy servitor be consecrated solely to thy service. May the I disappear forevermore, may only the instrument remain. May 4, 1914. To be merged both in thee and in thy work. To be no longer a limited individuality, to become the infinitude of thy forces manifesting through one point. To be freed from all shackles and all limitations. To rise above all restrictive thought, to act while remaining outside the action, to act with and for individuals while seeing only oneness, the oneness of thy love, thy knowledge, thy being. O my divine Master, eternal teacher, sole reality, dispel all darkness in this aggregate thou wast formed for thy service, thy manifestation in the world. Realize in it that supreme consciousness which will awaken the same consciousness everywhere. Oh, no longer to see appearances which incessantly change, always to contemplate in everything and everywhere only thy immutable oneness. O Lord, all my being cries to thee in an irresistible call, wilt thou not grant that I may become thyself in my integral consciousness, since in truth I am thou and thou art I? May 9, 1914. Just at the moment when I was feeling the imperious need of resuming these notes regularly so as to come out of this overwhelming mental inertia, my physical organism suffered a defeat such as it had not known for several years, and during a few days all the forces of my body failed me. I saw in this a sign that I had made a mistake, that my spiritual energy had weakened, my vision of the omnipotent oneness had been clouded, that some wrong suggestion had managed to disturb me in some way, and I bowed down before thee, O Lord, my sweet Master, with humility, conscious that I was not yet ready for a perfect identification with thee. Something in this aggregate which constitutes the instrument I can put at thy service is still obscure and obtuse, something does not respond as it should to thy forces, deforms and darkens their manifestation. A great problem came up before me, and illness covered it with its veil and prevented me from solving it. Now that I am living once more in the feeling of thy oneness, the problem no longer seems to have any sense, and I do not understand it very well anymore. It seems to me I have left something far behind me, it seems to me that I am slowly awakening to a new life. I would it were not an illusion and this deep and smiling peace had returned forever. O my divine Master, my love aspires to thee more intensely than ever, let me be thy living love in the world. And nothing but that. May all egoism, all limitation, all darkness disappear, may my consciousness be identified with thine so that thou alone mayst be the will acting through this fragile and transient instrument. O my sweet Master, how ardently my love aspires to thee. Grant that I may be nothing but thy divine love, and that in every being this love may awake, powerful and victorious. Let me be a vast mantle of love enveloping all the earth, entering all hearts, murmuring in every ear thy divine message of hope and peace. O my divine Master, how ardently I aspire for thee. Break these chains of darkness and error, dispel this ignorance, liberate me, make me see thy light. Break these chains. I want to understand and I want to be. That is to say, this I must be thy I, and there must be only one single I in the world. O Lord, grant my prayer, my supplication rises ardently to thee. May 10, 1914. It is thy sweet joy, O Lord, that fills my heart, it is thy silent peace that reigns over my mind. All is repose, force, concentration, light and serenity, and all this is without any limit, without any division. Is it only the earth, or rather the whole universe, that lives in me? I do not know, but it is thou, O Lord, who dwellest in this consciousness and givest it life. It is thou who seest, knowest, actest. It is thou alone whom I see everywhere, or rather there is no longer any I, all is one, and this oneness is thou. Glory to thee, O Lord, Master of the world, thou shinest resplendent in all things. May 12, 1914. More and more it seems to me that we are in one of those periods of activity in which the fruit of past efforts becomes apparent, a period in which we act according to thy law in the measure in which it is the sovereign controller of our being, without having even the leisure to become conscious of the law. This morning, passing by a rapid experience from depth to depth, I was able, once again, as always, to identify my consciousness with thine and to live no longer in aught but thee. Indeed, it was thou alone that wast living, but immediately thou will pulled my consciousness towards the exterior, towards the work to be done, and thou saidst to me, be the instrument of which I have need. And is not this the last renunciation, to renounce identification with thee, to renounce the sweet and pure joy of no longer distinguishing between thee and me, the joy of knowing at each moment, not only with the intellect but by an integral experience, that thou art the unique reality and that all the rest is but appearance and illusion. That the exterior being should be the docile instrument which does not even need to be conscious of the will which moves it, is not doubtful, but why must I be almost entirely identified with the instrument, and why should not I be entirely merged in thee and live thy full and absolute consciousness? I ask, but I am not anxious about it. I know that all is according to thy will, and with a pure adoration I trust myself joyously to thy will. I shall be what thou wouldst have me be, O Lord, conscient or inconscient, a simple instrument as is the body or a supreme knowledge as art thou. Oh, the sweet and peaceful joy when one can say all is good and feel thee at work in the world through all the elements which lend themselves to that transmission. Thou art the sovereign master of all, thou art the inaccessible, the unknowable, the eternal and sublime reality. O marvelous unity, I disappear in thee. May 13, 1914. This somnolence of my thought, O Lord, thou wilt shake off so that I may have the knowledge and understand the experience thou hast given to my being. When something in me questions thee, always thou repliest, and when it is necessary for me to know something, thou teachest it to me, whether directly or indirectly. I see more and more that all impatient revolt, all haste would be useless, everything is slowly organized so that I may serve thee as I should. What is my place in this service? For a long time I have stopped asking myself this. What does it matter? Is it necessary to know whether one is at the center or on the circumference? Provided that entirely consecrated to thee, living only for thee and by thee, I carry out better and better the task thou givest me, all the rest has no importance at all. I would say more, provided thy work is accomplished in the world as well and as completely as it can be, does it matter which individual or group realizes this work? O my sweet Master, in peace, serenity, equanimity, I give myself to thee and merge in thee, my thought calm and tranquil, my heart smiling, thy work will be done, I know, and thy victory is certain. O my sweet Master, grant to all the sovereign boon of thy illumination. May 15, 1914. As on reaching a summit, one discovers a vast horizon, so, O Lord, when one's consciousness is identified with that intermediate domain between thy unity and the manifested world, one participates both in thy infinitude and in the realization of the world. It is as though one were at a center where the consciousness, wholly steeped in thy effective power, could direct the ray of thy forces upon the lowly instrument moving among its brother instruments. From the height of these transcendent regions the unity of physical substance is clearly visible, and yet the body which serves as a particular instrument in the material field seems specially precise and distinct like a stronger point amidst this whole, at once multiple and one, in which the forces circulate evenly. This perception has not left me since yesterday. It has settled in as something definitive, and all the outer activity which apparently continues as usual, has become mechanical like a marvelously articulated and animated toy moved by the consciousness from the height of its seat which though no longer individual is still universal, that is, which is not yet completely merged in thy oneness. All the laws of individual manifestation have become clear to me, but in so synthetical, so global, so simultaneous a way, that it is impossible to express this in our ordinary language. May 16, 1914. I was interrupted yesterday just when I was trying to formulate the experience I had. And now everything seems changed. That precise knowledge, that clear sightedness has given place to a great love for thee, O Lord, which has seized my whole being from the outer organism to the deepest consciousness, and all lies prostrate at thy feet in an ardent aspiration for a definitive identification with thee, an absorption in thee. I implored thee with all the energy I could summon. And once again, just when it seemed to me that my consciousness was going to disappear in thine, just when all my being was nothing but a pure crystal reflecting thy presence, someone came and interrupted my concentration. Such is, indeed, the symbol of the existence thou givest me as my share, in which outer usefulness, the work for all, holds a much greater place even than the supreme realization. All the circumstances of my life seem always to tell me on thy behalf. It is not through supreme concentration that thou wilt realize oneness, it is by spreading out in all. May thy will be done, O Lord. Now I understand clearly that union with thee is not an aim to be pursued. So far as this present individuality is concerned, it is an accomplished fact since a long time. And that is why thou seemest to tell me always, do not delight in the ecstatic contemplation of this union, accomplish the mission I have entrusted to thee upon earth. And the individual work to be carried on simultaneously with the collective work is to become aware and take possession of all the activities and parts of the being, the definitive establishment of consciousness in the highest point, making possible both the prescribed action and the constant communion with thee. The joys of perfect union cannot come until what has to be done is done. First, union must be preached to all, afterwards work, but for those who have realized the union, every moment of their life must be an integral expression of thy will. Through them. May 17, 1914. O Lord, deliver me from the mental influences which weigh upon me, so that, completely free, I may soar towards thee. O thou, universal being, supreme unity in perceptible form, through an irresistible aspiration I nestled within thy heart, then I was thy heart itself, and I knew then that thy heart is no other than the child who plays and creates the worlds. Thou didst tell me, one day thou wilt be my head, but for the moment turn thy gaze towards the earth. And on the earth now I am the joyful child who plays. These were the 2 sentences I wrote yesterday by a kind of absolute necessity. The first, as though the power of the prayer would not be complete unless it were traced on paper. The second, as though the stability of the experience could not be had unless I unburdened my mind of it by noting it down in writing. May 18, 1914. Teacher, you art the sole reality, O Lord, thou art omnipotence and eternity. And he who is united with thee in the depths of his being becomes thy reality in its eternal and immutable omnipotence. But for others the command is, even while remaining in contact with thee, to turn their eyes and activity towards the earth, such is the mission thou hast given them. Here begins the difficulty, for everything depends upon the perfection of the various states of their being, and, even after attaining the sublime identification, they must still work at perfecting the instrument which will manifest thy divine will. This is where the task becomes arduous. Everything seems to me mediocre, insufficient, neutral, almost inert in the present instrument which thou makest me call myself, and the more I am united with thee, the more do I realize the mediocrity of its faculties and its manifestation. Everything in it seems to me an incorrigible approximation. And if that cannot disturb me in any way, it is because the true self is lying at thy feet or nestling in thy heart or conscious with thy eternal and immutable consciousness, and looks at the whole manifestation with a smile of patient and understanding benevolence. May 19, 1914. This mental being which throughout my individual existence had the power to set all my faculties working, deep devotion for thee, infinite compassion for men, ardent aspiration for knowledge, effort for self-perfection, seems to have fallen into a deep sleep and no longer sets anything at all in movement. All the individual faculties slumber and the consciousness is not yet fully awake in the transcendent states, that is, its wakefulness in them is intermittent and in between there is sleep. Something in this being aspires for solitude and absolute silence for a little while, so as to come out of this unsatisfactory transition, and something else knows that it is thy will that this instrument be consecrated to the service of all, even if this must apparently be harmful to its self-perfecting. Something in this being tells thee, O Lord, I know nothing. I am nothing. I can do nothing. I am in the darkness of inconscience. And something else knows that it is thyself and thus the supreme perfection. What is going to come out of that? How will such a state come to an end? Whether it is inertia or true patience, I do not know, but without haste or desire I lie at thy feet and wait. May 20, 1914. From the height of that summit which is the identification with thy divine infinite love, thou didst turn my eyes to this complex body which has to serve thee as thy instrument. And thou didst tell me, it is myself, dost thou not see my light shining in it? And indeed I saw thy divine love, clothed in intelligence, then in strength, constituting this body in its smallest cells and shining so brightly in it that it was nothing but a combination of millions of radiant sparks, all manifesting that they were thyself. And now all darkness has disappeared, and thou alone livest, in different worlds, in different forms but with an identical life, immutable and eternal. This divine world of thy immutable domain of pure love and indivisible unity must be brought into close communion with the divine world of all the other domains, right down to the most material in which thou art the center and very constitution of each atom. To establish a bond of perfect consciousness between all these successive divine worlds is the only way to live constantly, invariably in thee, accomplishing integrally the mission thou hast entrusted to the entire being in all its states of consciousness and all its modes of activity. O my sweet Master, thou hast caused a new veil to be rent, another veil of my ignorance, and, without leaving my blissful place in thy eternal heart, I am at the same time in the imperceptible but infinite heart of each of the atoms constituting my body. Strengthen this complete and perfect consciousness. Make me enter into all the details of its perfection and grant that, without leaving thee for a single moment, I may constantly move up and down this infinite ladder, according to the necessity of the work thou hast prescribed for me. I am thine, I am in thee, thyself, in the plenitude of eternal bliss. May 21st, 1914. Outside all manifestation, in the immutable silence of eternity, I am in thee, O Lord, an unmoving beatitude. In that which, out of thy puissance and marvelous light, forms the center and reality of the atoms of matter, I find thee, thus without going out of thy presence I can disappear in thy supreme consciousness or see thee in the radiant particles of my being. And for the moment that is the plenitude of thy life and thy illumination. I see thee, I am thyself, and between these two poles, my intense love aspires towards thee. May 22nd, 1914. When we have discerned successively what is real from what is unreal in all the states of being and all the worlds of life, when we have arrived at the perfect and integral certitude of the sole reality, we must turn our gaze from the heights of this supreme consciousness towards the individual aggregate which serves as the immediate instrument for thy manifestation upon earth, and see in it nothing but thee, our sole real existence. Thus each atom of this aggregate will be awakened to receive thy sublime influence. The ignorance and the darkness will disappear not only from the central consciousness of the being but also from its most external mode of expression. It is only by the fulfillment, by the perfection of this labor of transfiguration that there can be manifested the plenitude of thy presence, thy light and thy love. Lord, thou makest me understand this truth ever more clearly, lead me step by step on that path. My whole being down to its smallest atom aspires for the perfect knowledge of thy presence and a complete union with it. Let every obstacle disappear, let thy divine knowledge replace in every part the darkness of the ignorance. Even as thou hast illumined the central consciousness, the will in the being, enlighten too this outermost substance. And let the whole individuality, from its first origin and essence to its last projection and most material body, be unified in a perfect realization and a complete manifestation of thy sole reality. Nothing is in the universe but thy life, thy light, thy love. Let everything become resplendent and transfigured by the knowledge of thy truth. Thy divine love floods my being, thy supreme light is shining in every cell, all exults because it knows thee. And because it is one with thee. May 23rd, 1914. O Lord, thou of whom I would be constantly conscious and whom I would realize in the smallest cells of my being, thou whom I would know as myself and see manifested in all things, thou who art the sole reality, the sole cause and aim of existence, grant that my love for thee may grow ever greater so that I may be all love, thy love itself, and that, being thy love, I may unite integrally with thee. May this love grow more and more intense, complete, luminous, powerful, may this love become an irresistible urge towards thee, the invincible means of manifesting thee. May everything in this being become pure, profound, disinterested, divine love, from the unfathomable depths to the outermost substance. May the God with form who manifests in this aggregate be entirely molded from thy complete and sublime love, the love which is at once the source and the realization of all knowledge. May thought be clarified, organized, enlightened, transformed by thy love. May all the life forces, solely impregnated by thy love and molded from it, draw from it irresistible purity and constant energy, power and rectitude. May this weakened intermediary being take advantage of its weakness to reconstitute itself with elements entirely molded from thy love, and may this body, now a burning brazier, radiate thy divine, impersonal, sublime and calm love from every pore. May the brain be reconstituted by thy love. Lastly, may thy love overflow, flood, penetrate, transfigure, regenerate, animate all things, with the power, the splendor, the sweetness and force which are its very own. In thy love is peace, in thy love is joy, in thy love is thy servitor's sovereign lever of work. Thy love is vaster than the universe and more lasting than all the ages, it is infinite, eternal, it is thyself. And it is thyself I want to be and that I am, for such is thy law, such is thy will. May 24, 1914. O my sweet Master, let me not be submerged by outer things. They have no interest, no savour for me. If I busy myself with them, it is because I feel that such is thy will, and the work must be accomplished integrally, down to the least details of the action and substance. But it is quite enough to turn one's attention to them and infuse thy forces into them as much as possible. They must not be allowed to take precedence of the true realities in one's consciousness. O my sweet Master, I aspire for thee, for the knowledge of what thou art, for identification with thee. I ask for a greater love, growing always purer, always vaster, always more intense, and I find myself as it were submerged in matter. Is this thy reply? As thou hast thyself accepted to be thus submerged in matter so as to awaken it gradually to consciousness, is this the result of a more perfect identification with thee? Is this not thy answer to me? If thou wouldst learn to love truly, this is how thou shouldst love. In darkness and unconsciousness. O my Lord, my sweet Master, thou knowest that I belong to thee and that always I want what thou willest, but do not let any doubt about what thou willest arise in me. Enlighten me in some way in the immutable peace of the heart. Let me be submerged in darkness if that is necessary, but at least let me know that it is thou who willest it. Lord, in response, I hear singing within my heart the hymn of gladness of thy divine and permanent presence. May 25, 1914. O Divine Master of love and purity, grant that in its least stages, its smallest activities, this instrument which wants to serve thee worthily may be purified of all egoism, all error, all obscurity, so that nothing in it may impair, deform or stop thy action. How many little recesses lie yet in shadow, far from the full light of thy illumination. For these I ask the supreme happiness of this illumination. Oh, to be the pure flawless crystal which lets thy divine ray pass without obscuring, coloring or distorting it. Not from a desire for perfection but so that thy work may be done as perfectly as possible. And when I ask thee this, the eye which speaks to thee is the entire earth, aspiring to be this pure diamond, a perfect reflector of thy supreme light. All the hearts of men beat within my heart, all their thoughts vibrate in my thought, the slightest aspiration of a docile animal or a modest plant unites with my formidable aspiration, and all this rises towards thee, for the conquest of thy love and light, scaling the summits of being to attain thee, ravish thee from thy motionless beatitude and make thee penetrate the darkness of suffering to transform it into divine joy, into sovereign peace. And this violence is made of an infinite love which gives itself and a trustful serenity which smiles with the certitude of thy perfect unity. O my sweet Master, thou art the triumpher and the triumph, the victor and the victory. May 26, 1914. Oh, when the surface is the storm, the sea is in turmoil, waves clash and leap one on another and break with a mighty uproar. But all the time, under this water in fury, are vast smiling expanses, peaceful and motionless. They look upon the surface agitation as an indispensable act, for matter has to be vigorously churned if it is to become capable of manifesting entirely the divine light. Behind the troubled appearance, behind the struggle and anguish of the conflict, the consciousness remains firm at its post, observing all the movements of the outer being. It intervenes only to rectify direction and position, so as not to allow the play to become too dramatic. This intervention is now firm and a little severe, now ironical, a call to order or a mockery, full always of a strong, gentle, peaceful and smiling benevolence. In the silence I beheld thy infinite and eternal beatitude. Then softly a prayer rises towards thee from what is still in the shadow and the struggle. O sweet Master, O supreme giver of illumination and purity, grant that all substance and every activity may be no more anything other than a constant manifestation of thy divine love and thy sovereign serenity. And in my heart is the song of gladness of thy sublime magnificence. May 27, 1914. In each one of the domains of the being, the consciousness must be awakened to the perfect existence, knowledge and bliss. These three worlds or modes of the divine are found in the physical reality as well as in the states of force and light and those of impersonality and infinitude, of eternity. When one enters with full consciousness into the higher states, to live this existence, light and bliss is easy, almost inevitable. But what is very important, as well as very difficult, is to awaken the being to this triple divine consciousness in the most material worlds. This is the first point. Then one must succeed in finding the center of all the divine worlds, probably in the intermediate world, whence one can unite the consciousness of these divine worlds, synthesize them, and act simultaneously and with full awareness in all domains. I know that it is a very long way from these incomplete and imperfect explanations to the sublime reality which manifests thee, O Lord. Thy splendor, thy power and thy magnificence, thy incommensurable love are above all explanation and comment. But my intellect needs to represent things to itself at least a little schematically, in order to allow the most material states of the being to enter as completely as possible into harmony with thy will. Yet it is in the deep silence of my mute and total adoration that I best understand thee. For then who can say what loves, what is loved, and what is the power of loving in itself? All three are but one in an infinite bliss. O give to everyone, Lord, the boon of that incomparable bliss. May 28, 1914. Teacher, you settest in motion, thou stirrest and churnest the innumerable elements of this world, so that, from their primal darkness, their primeval chaos, they may awaken to consciousness and the full light of knowledge. And thou usest thy supreme love to churn all these elements in this way. And it is from thy infinite, unfathomable heart that these inexhaustible torrents of love spring forth. Thy heart is my dwelling place, thy heart is the reality of my being. In thy heart I have nestled and I have become thy heart. Peace, peace upon all beings.